Hey guys, this is Paul with Injector Dynamics and Yaw Power, and the reason for that was to make sure my microphone was working because I just recorded this entire video and then played it back to find that I had no sound. So I get to do it again. Now I've had some practice. Maybe I'll make it better, or maybe I'll completely screw it up. Who knows? So obviously, based on the cover image, you can see what this is about. Is the horsepower rating on the new supercharged H2 Kawasaki Teryx. I don't know if I got that in the right order. And so they put that out there. They said this makes 250 horsepower. It's the highest horsepower UTV on the market. And they included a disclaimer here. And somebody saw the disclaimer, decided to give it a read. And we ended up with this highlighted here in red, which said that it was measured according to the ISO standard 4106 and that the measurement may be higher than if it were measured by an SAE standard. So they went crazy on the internet. Kawasaki's trying to rip us off. You know, they just they're fudging numbers, doing whatever they can do to claim they have the most powerful car. So it's all pretty silly. I have both of the documents, both of the standards. So I'm going to work through those documents with you. I'm going to show you what the standard is, what the difference is between the ISO standard and the SAE standard. I'll show you a few examples based on atmospheric conditions, and you can finally understand what it's all about and not have to rely on the keyboard warriors who are, you know, locked in their mom's basement playing on a laptop looking for something to do because they're tired of video games or whatever the case may be. So let me get this out of the way and get right on to it. Now, the first thing that's going to happen is that a number of you, having made it this far, are going to see these equations and say, hey, I'm out of here. I don't want a math lesson. This isn't a math lesson. I'm putting this here just to show you what's going on. We're not going to work through the math. I'm just using it for the sake of explanation. So stay tuned. I'm going to show you what the difference is between these two standards. Maybe I'll put some dancing girls in at the end or something like that. Okay, so the first thing is we have two standards, the ISO and the SAE standard. You know, what's the point? The point is simply that horsepower sells, and everybody wants to have big horsepower numbers. I mean, people even shop that way. And since the beginning of time, probably back from the Model T, people were making horsepower claims. And I'm sure that at some point people were doing whatever they could do to take advantage and get bigger numbers, whether or not they might be true. So these two organizations that literally do nothing but supply standards for all types of testing, automotive and otherwise, they said this is the standard. If you're going to make a horsepower claim, follow our standard and note that you did, and that way we know they're all comparable. So that when Ford is in a horsepower battle with Dodge or General Motors, Polaris, Can-Am, whatever the case, we're all speaking the same language. So the intent is good, but then of course you have to wonder if there's two different standards, what's the point, right? Which is really what this video ends up being about. So there are two different standards, and in addition to stating how the vehicle must be tested and under what atmospheric conditions, they have some calculations in here that make corrections based on the atmospheric conditions, because if you say the barometric pressure has to be this, the temperature has to be that, the humidity has to be this, how do you make that happen? Even with the billions of dollars that the major auto manufacturers have, they don't all have the ability to exactly match those conditions. And so that's critical because you all know that on a hot day, your car makes less power. If you go up in elevation, so barometric pressure goes down, you make less power. You go down in elevation, you make more power. Everybody gets that, and there are correction factors that are designed to account for that, at least within a fairly narrow window. So again, the point is to have a standard and then to allow correction, because we can't all be testing under exact specific atmospheric conditions. So let's start with the atmospheric standard itself. With the ISO, they say barometric pressure should be 100 kPa, temperature is 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and relative humidity is 30%. Now, if we move down to the SAE standard, it's stated somewhat differently. We have barometric pressure of 100 kPa, same temperature, but they stated dry air pressure of 99 kPa. And here's what that amounts to. When you have water vapor in the air, it exerts pressure. So when you want to make corrections to the engine performance, accurate corrections to the engine performance, you have to get rid of that. You basically subtract that out from the barometric pressure. So if we do that with the ISO standard and we calculate the water vapor pressure, it ends up being 1 kPa, and if we subtract that from 100, we get 99 kPa. So ultimately, we have the exact same atmospheric standard for both tests. 99 kPa dry air, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and those are the only two, really the only two factors that are used in making the correction is dry air pressure and temperature. Okay, so what is the correction factor? Again, more math, don't run away, don't worry. The first term just basically says that power output is proportional to barometric pressure or dry air pressure, right? So if you could double the pressure somehow, if you could go far enough below sea level, you would find that the power would double. And then we have the second term here that is temperature based. It's based on absolute temperature. If you don't know what that means, look it up. Or if you just don't care, like most of you probably don't. Power output is proportional to the square root, or inversely proportional, just to throw a big math term in there for you, to the square root of the absolute temperature. So both standards are based on this correction. So hopefully, if you're paying attention, you're saying, well, wait, if the standard is the same and the correction is the same, what the hell's the difference? Well, here we have to talk about friction. If you test an engine on a dyno and you find that it makes 85 horsepower at the crank, what's really happening, if that engine has 85% mechanical efficiency, the engine's really making 100 horsepower, but 15 horsepower is being consumed in friction. Friction from the bearings, the rings sliding up and down the bore, the piston skirts on the bore, every bit of friction in there, timing chains, things like that. And so a relatively standard assumption or prediction is that most engines are about 85% mechanical efficient. Now, SAE goes to great lengths to detail that in their document, and then, of course, go on to state that the assumption is it's 85% efficient mechanically. The ISO document ignores it completely, but they do account for it, and let me show you how that works in accounting for that. So starting with the SAE standard, we've got the same equation as above, but we notice there's an exponent that's been added, 1.176 and 0.588. The reason for that is that if we were to double the pressure, for instance, on our 100 horsepower engine that shows 85 at the crank, the power would double, except that the friction losses would remain unchanged. Now, again, I used the idea that we're doubling the pressure. Of course, that's never going to happen. There's a specification here that says, within a fairly narrow range. And the idea is that if it cools down 20 degrees outside, the engine's going to make more power, but the frictional losses stay the same. So the correction is applied to the gross power, and then the frictional losses are subtracted from that. And the way that looks mathematically is we get this exponent. And in this case, again, with the SAE standard, an exponent of 1.176 and 0.588. Now, here's where the difference is. The ISO standard has exponents of 1.2 and 0.6. It's very slightly different. And so if I work that out, if I kind of reverse engineer this equation here, we find that their assumption is that there is a correction factor of, a mechanical efficiency of 83.33%. So that skews the numbers a little bit, and that's really what the difference is between the two, and that's why Kawasaki made the statement that they did. So let's move on and talk about what that means in the real world. The first thing I want to make clear is that these atmospheric corrections only apply to a relatively narrow range. So you could not do an engine test in Denver, Colorado at, 12,000 feet, 10,000 feet, I don't know what it is, because the correction factor would be so big, at that point it would lose accuracy. So this only works in a relatively narrow range. So the ISO standard says a range for correction of 0.96 to 1.06, meaning minus 4% to plus 6%. The SAE standard is slightly different. They specify a temperature range, a pressure range, and a maximum of 70% relative humidity. So there is a slight difference there. But that's really how this all breaks down. We have a very slight difference only because SAE is assuming 85% mechanical efficiency, and ISO is assuming 83.3% mechanical efficiency. And as you can see here, the numbers don't add up to much. And then the next thing we need to talk about, because this came up a lot, I think by people who apparently hadn't read the papers, is that the ISO standard is a motorcycle standard, which it is, and it doesn't require any accessories. And that's not the case. All accessories are required. I forget the wording. I should have included it. Instead, I included the entire list of what's required. But basically, this test has to be done just as it's done on the vehicle as it's delivered to the customer, down to every little detail, even like fan placement and things like that. So here's the list of what's required in the ISO document. And you can see that everything is here. The muffler, the air inlet, duct work. I mean, that means every little piece of everything. The water pump, because the water pump draws power. They even go on to state that cooling needs to be done by the water pump. It can't be done artificially, to allow you to fudge the numbers. Everything's got to be here. We go down to the SAE standard and we see the exact same thing. Everything that matters has to be here. And the point of these standards is to keep people from fudging numbers and basically being able to put BS out to the public to sell a vehicle. So we've got that out of the way. Hopefully, based on what I told you, you understand that the difference between the two standards is very, very small. But let's look at some real world numbers to see what it actually amounts to. When I say it's small, do I mean it's a 1/10% or 10%, right? Because that would matter. Well, it turns out it doesn't matter. So all you guys who wanted to run scared when you saw math, don't run scared because you see code. Here's why this is here. As I get older, I get even more and more lazy, and I don't like to do mathematics by hand anymore. So I just write a little bit of code to do it for me. So what we've got here, this little bit of code is essentially a calculator that calculates the correction factor, both correction factors based on atmospheric conditions. So let me see, I should open these up here so I can get access to these text boxes so I can punch numbers in. This is at atmospheric or at the atmospheric standard. Barometric pressure of 100 kPa, inlet temperature of 77 degrees Fahrenheit, relative humidity of 30%. That's the standard for both tests, and you can see that the correction factor is 1.000. It's the same for both of them. So let's start fiddling with some numbers and where we have to actually apply some correction to see what we come up with. SAE allows you to go all the way up to 110 kPa. And you can see that in this case, the SAE correction factor is in fact higher, but by a ridiculously small amount. It's 0.893 applied to the measured horsepower as opposed to 0.891. Now, I know that's insignificant, and you know that's insignificant, but companies like Kawasaki or General Motors or Polaris, they have to worry about some dickhead lawyer who wants to file a class action lawsuit, right? So they got to cover their ass. And that's what that disclaimer is about from Kawasaki. It's not about trying to trick you. It's about covering their ass so that somebody doesn't sue them over something ridiculous. Anyway, let's go back to, let's put that back at 100 kPa. Let's play with inlet temperature and see what happens. Let's go up with the temperature. In fact, let's go up here to the limit. The limit is 6%. For the ISO standard, and we can see that under these conditions, the ISO standard is actually higher. So let's go back the other direction and see what we get. Actually, if I go down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the SAE standard is slightly higher, but neither of those standards will actually allow you to even go that low because the correction factor is too big. So let's see. Let's look at humidity. We can go all the way up to 70% according to the SAE standard. What happens when we do that? Now the correction factors are the same. Let's see, in a couple conditions there, maybe based on rounding errors, yeah, one is a little higher than the other. Let's go down to the zero humidity. At zero humidity, right there, somebody can say the SAE correction factor is higher. Let's screw around with things a little more and see if we can make it better or worse. Find a bigger difference between the two. Let's see, we've gone too far here. Barometric pressure, let's crank that up. Again, almost no matter what I do with these sliders in these conditions, I can in many cases show that the SAE standard is higher, but it's higher by a 0.1%. It doesn't amount to anything. And in addition to that, even if it was higher by a lot, let's say it was 4 or 5% higher. At the end of the day, that matters in terms of bragging rights, but when you get in the vehicle and you drive it, it doesn't matter, and here's why. There are many other variables. In this case, the big one being the CVT, the belt drive that's in the Kawasaki. So with the CVT system, the losses are always higher than they would be with a geared transmission. A geared transmission may have 10% loss, just to throw a number out there. On a CVT, it could be as high as 20, 30%, depending on how it's tuned. In fact, when we first got our Pro R, we did some tests. We were continually increasing horsepower by adding some nitro and some other stuff to the fuel. And we got to a point where power would continue to increase, except up at real high speed, where it wasn't increasing at all. And I made some changes to the secondary spring. And I'm going from memory here. I should have brought up the graph. I picked up 27 horsepower at top speed, which I think in that car is 75 or 76 miles per hour. So the point is, what makes it to the ground makes a big difference. If we go back to a geared transmission, we can say that, well, it's more efficient, so it's definitely going to go faster. But that's also not true, because the beauty of a CVT is that when you put your foot in it, if the clutch is tuned properly, it's going to hold the engine right at its horsepower peak, which is what's going to give you maximum acceleration. Now, your geared transmission, like a DCT in a Honda Talon or a Maverick, will likely deliver more of that power to the wheels. The problem is you got to shift gears. So you're not always at the horsepower peak. And so if you have an engine with a very narrow power band, or you have a very wide split between gears, what you gain in driveline efficiency, you may lose just by falling off the power peak on your power band. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because look, these are going to be out there soon enough. Everybody's going to drive them, and they're going to find out what happens when you race an H2 and a Maverick up the hill at the dunes, right? Or which one comes off the corners harder when you're running the trails and on the racetrack and under every other condition. So the point I want to make is that, well, first, the difference in correction factors is practically meaningless. They just did that for legal reasons. The second is that it doesn't really matter, because there are too many other variables. And, horsepower sells. That's what this is all about. Everybody wants a big number, and that's true in the aftermarket as well, where correction factors and fuckery meant to pump up the numbers happens a lot more. So that's it. I hope from this that you understand what the differences are, which are almost nothing, right? And if you made it this far and you liked it and you enjoyed it, do something for me. Everybody knows who Injector Dynamics is, but at this point, because we're so new, nobody knows who Yaw Power Off-Road is. So go find us on Facebook. We're trying to get the page put together right now. Give me the click, the like, the follow, whatever the hell it is you're supposed to do there. Do that. Help us build the page. And if you don't, that's fine too. Enjoy this and float it around for all the guys who are raising hell trying to make claims about what Kawasaki's doing or not doing. And again, remember, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. We're all going to drive them and race them, and then we're really going to know who's boss. And then the aftermarket is going to get involved, and things are going to get even crazier from there in terms of power output. So that's it. I appreciate you watching, and have a good day or night or whatever it may be. See ya.